Andrew Huberman is one of the best sources of science-backed modern-day health advice that I've ever come across. If you aren't familiar with Andrew Huberman is the host of the Huberman Lab podcast. It's a podcast with millions of weekly listeners who all have become obsessed with the information that he is giving out completely for free week after week. Unlike a lot of other health podcasters, though, Andrew comes from an incredible background. He is a tenured professor at Stanford, a PhD, and a neuroscientist. Every single week, he releases a new episode of his podcast that's either a solo episode where he just brain dumps an incredible wealth of information, or he has other incredible guests on the podcast as well that share their wealth of knowledge with his audience. The reason why I wanted to share this video is to highlight some of the things that have had the biggest impact on my own personal life from the Andrew Huberman podcast and the information that he shares out there, because frankly, every minute of his podcast is so packed with information that sometimes it's really difficult to understand what to do, and even I am guilty of getting analysis paralysis and really taking no action after listening to some of his episodes. If you stick around to the end, I'll give you 5 of my favorite bonus episodes from the Andrew Huberman podcast that will continue this whole learning journey that I think will have a great impact on you as well. Let me know if you listen to the Huberman Lab podcast or if you take anything from this video in the comments down below. I'm super keen to hear what things have the most impact on you. The first big tip from the Huberman Lab podcast that I've taken is that you should be getting light exposure or light in your eyes first thing in the morning. There's some incredible science behind light exposure and its effects on your body. According to Andrew, getting light exposure first thing in the morning leads to something called a cortisol peak. Some of the benefits of having this cortisol peak in the morning and getting light exposure first thing in the morning is increased mood throughout the day, energy throughout the day, as well as cognitive alertness. It can also help you fall asleep earlier at night, which is another major benefit. In his daily blueprint, which I'll give a link to down below, he suggests taking a morning walk, as it can both provide light exposure to make sure that you're getting light exposure early in the morning, as well as something called optic flow. Essentially, optic flow is your eyes adjusting and being used first thing in the morning and getting accustomed to motion. This can also increase the quality of sleep that you get every night, and it can also help with the health of your eyes. The benefits that I've noticed since getting light exposure over the last couple of years, since first hearing about this from the Huberman Lab podcast, is that I have an increased mood throughout the day. My energy levels are much higher, and on days that I get light exposure first thing in the morning versus days that I don't, I find that I absolutely am more productive. I'm able to get into my work easier, and I have a lot more focused work and flow state throughout the day than on mornings that I don't. I also notice that I get tired at basically the exact same time every single night, and I fall asleep between the hours of 8 and 9 every single night, especially when I'm having that cortisol peak first thing in the morning. Tip number 2 is to delay caffeine consumption in the morning. If you're anything like me in past years, I basically have rolled out of bed and I've had my coffee machine already set with a timer on it so that first thing in the morning I can hit the cup of joe. Needless to say, this is a little bit more difficult for me since, especially recently over the last year or so, I've been working out first thing in the morning quite heavily. Andrew says it's totally fine to have caffeine before a workout in the morning if that is your daily routine, but it is definitely optimal to delay caffeine consumption for 90 minutes to 120 minutes after waking. The benefits of this are increased alertness throughout the day and an avoidance of an afternoon crash between the hours of 1 and 3 p.m. when a lot of people tend to get very tired. If you're experiencing a crash around 1 to 2 p.m. in the afternoon, there's a very good chance that having caffeine first thing in the morning might be to blame. When you wake up and throughout the day, a chemical builds up in your brain called adenosine. This chemical drives something that is called sleep pressure, and caffeine essentially works by blocking the adenosine receptors and essentially tricking your mind into having a false sense of alertness and mitigating that sense of sleep pressure. As that pressure builds throughout the day, once your body metabolizes that caffeine, all of that sleep pressure is released all at once, and that is what becomes that afternoon crash, is that rush of adenosine takes form. Delaying caffeine consumption until later in the day essentially enables your body to metabolize some of that sleep pressure and some of that adenosine so that it doesn't build up to the same extent and release all in one go in the early afternoon. This is something that I've definitely felt personally. If you work out first thing in the morning like me, it's just really not feasible for me to wait 90 to 100 minutes. My workout would be over and then I'd be taking some pre-workout at that point. What I would recommend doing is just wait until you get to the gym to start drinking your pre-workout or your caffeine. This will be about 45 minutes to an hour, which from what Andrew shared in other episodes is definitely adequate time to at least release some of that sleep pressure. And for me personally, it's helped me really avoid that afternoon crash. He covers this in depth in his episode, Using Caffeine to Optimize Physical and Mental Performance. I'll link to that in the description down below for you. The next major tip that I've taken from Huberman is to focus on hydration. Dehydration has immediate and large impacts on our physical performance and mental performance. Huberman explains that this is due to two things: physical fatigue as well as brain fog. When our body has enough fluid in it through signals like a full bladder or feeling hydrated, there's a mechanical signature as well as a chemical signal that sends signals to the area of the brain that make us more alert. He goes on to explain that there's a very real link between being properly hydrated and being mentally alert. It's not the best way to hydrate. It's much better to have electrolytes, but I do now carry an entire gallon of water around with me, starting in the morning when I'm at the gym, trying to drink it mostly by midday so that that water is in my system and it's not waking me up in the middle of the night. Additionally, during my intense workouts in the morning, I take a scoop of BPN electrolytes. I'll link to that in the description down below if that sounds interesting to you. I take a lot of joy in marking drinking this entire gallon of water off of my habit tracker every single day, and I definitely have noticed some real positive impact from drinking an entire gallon of water in addition to other proper hydration techniques throughout the day. Andrew also has an amazing episode on how to optimize water quality as well as hydration quality, so I'll link to that video in the description down below as well. Since adopting this habit, I definitely have noticed that my cognitive performance is significantly better. My energy levels are also much lower on days where I'm not drinking the entire gallon of water and getting it into my system early than on days that I do. The fourth tip from Huberman that I definitely have taken away is that it's a good idea to reduce or eliminate entirely alcohol consumption. A mentor of mine that I worked with a couple of years ago really did a great job of explaining to me the importance of really restricting the amount of alcohol that I was drinking if I really wanted to get to the types of levels of success that I wanted to achieve in my life. Alcohol, for a number of different reasons, as I'll explain, is really a huge inhibitor to personal growth as well as cognitive growth. As an entrepreneur, I'm always looking for a competitive advantage, as literally every day I'm in the marketplace competing with other organizations, and because of that I decided to stop drinking alcohol entirely a couple of years ago. The effects really were immediate for me. I felt the reduced inflammation, I felt the reduced brain fog, and I enjoyed the benefits of not having to nurse hangovers ever again for this entire time since I stopped drinking, which is pretty amazing. All of that together has had a pretty profound effect on my productivity and my overall mindset and mental health. In his episode with Matthew McDougall, a doctor local to San Francisco, Huberman asks a simple question. He says, other than preventing having a brain injury and then having another brain injury, what's one thing that you would recommend to people that want to preserve their cognitive and brain health over time? Dr. McDougall then goes on to talk about the long-term effects that he sees firsthand on people's brains that are drinking a lot of alcohol and the negative effects that it has on cognitive decline as well as short and long-term health. If you need more conclusive evidence, Huberman references a study that was done by the UK Brain Bank where they looked at many brains that are affected by alcohol, and they concluded from an extensive brain study that for every one additional drink that you have per week, there's a direct correlation to brain atrophy or shrinking and decline. Alcohol, at the end of the day, is a poison and it acts as one in the body. I'll link to another episode from Huberman in the description down below where he talks about effects that alcohol has on the brain and the body at different levels of consumption. I thought that episode was really informative and interesting. In that episode, he talks about how alcohol affects inflammation, stress, neurodegeneration, and cancer risk, and negatively affects the gut biome, brain thickness, hormone balance, mood, and feelings of motivation. Make sure to check that out after this video. Tip number 5 is to focus on getting enough sleep every night. Sleep is the building block of all bodily function and process, and it's not something that you can just simply reduce or skip. If you're getting less than the required amount of sleep and quality sleep every night, you are operating in a state of cognitive impairment, and this is something that is scientifically proven to be true. Huberman has an entire series on the topic of what he calls sleep hygiene, which has been completely game-changing for me when it comes to my productivity, motivation, and energy levels throughout the day. He explains that adequate sleep with adequate cycles of REM and deep sleep help consolidate memories, enhance cognitive function, help our immune system, and increase hormone production, as well as support mental health and well-being. He explains that missing out on the required amount of sleep over a long period of time is is basically sustained sleep deprivation. It can have lasting and serious implications over time. Some great steps that he recommends that everybody can do to start getting some better sleep every night are: 1, to prioritize a consistent sleep schedule that will regulate your circadian rhythm. This means go to sleep no more than 1 hour later or 1 hour earlier than you usually do, and do the same for waking up. Try and wake up around the same time each day. He mentions that sleeping in on the weekends can really disrupt this whole sequence throughout the entire week, so try to even maintain that on the weekends if possible. He recommends the typical things like dimming computer screens, using blue light blockers if possible, and just trying to filter or reduce any blue light that might be coming your way in those later hours in the evening. I'll link to a couple of my favorite episodes when it comes to sleep quality and sleep health in the description down below for you. And some other great episodes that I would recommend are: 1, his episode on the science and health benefits of deliberate heat exposure, as well as his episode that talks about the same for cold exposure as well. Another episode is his Goals Toolkit episodes, which really talks about neuroplasticity, and it talks about using science to improve our behaviors or create change. Another great episode is his episode titled Developing a Rational Approach to Supplementation for Health and Performance. And lastly, I'd recommend his episode with Dr. Adam Grant on how to unlock your potential, motivation, and unique abilities. As you can see, I needed to read from my screen because these are some pretty complex titles, just like some pretty complex topics that he talks about in his video. Check those out and let me know what you took away or learned from this video, or if you follow Mr. Huberman, let me know the biggest takeaways that you've had from his podcast in the comments down below. If you're looking for more from me, I'd recommend this video right here, where I talk about some actual science and tactic-based things that you can do to unlock incredible focus on demand. These are things that I do every day, including today, to be focused and create videos like this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.